All right, we're live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being flexible and meeting tonight. You're in for a treat. It's a good class tonight. We are going to be talking about lesson planning, and we're going to break apart some standards and make some objectives, and it's a lot of fun. In my sick world, it is, at least. But we're gonna kind of fly through what Common Core standards are. The background I'm going to give you before we get into lesson planning is things that you need to consider when you're lesson planning. Last week, we talked about differentiation. So how you can differentiate your content, your process, and your product. Content would be what you're actually putting in the lesson plan. Okay, your process is how you teach. So, how you deliver your lesson plan. Is it going to be student-centered, which we're going to or teacher-centered, like we're going to talk about tonight, like direct instruction, or more student-centered, project-based, which we'll talk about next week. So let's get rolling. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Common Core standards, talk about how goal setting applies to lesson planning, how to explain content clearly, and understand the purpose and strengths and limitations of at least one instructional strategy tonight, which is teacher-centered instruction. And we're going to look at how to sequence your instruction. This is super important. You can see teachers winging it a lot if you go do observations or using curriculum to teach. None of those resources actually sequence a lesson as well as what I'm going to show you tonight. And how to connect. We're going to continue to talk about connecting content with student backgrounds. So tonight's objectives, you'll be able to create a teachable objective by deconstructing a Common Core standard, and you'll be able to identify the components of a direct instruction lesson plan by hopefully creating one yourself tonight. We'll play a little bit with it, okay? I know that's one of your assignments coming up, so. All right, you're going to start. We're going to touch upon Webb's depth of knowledge a little bit. That's getting your lesson plan to go a little deeper as you identify ways to differentiate your content. So key focuses in teaching, think CIA, curriculum, instruction, and assessment. And it all revolves around the student. Student-centered teaching, student-based teaching. That means instruction that's designed on student outcomes. So we talked about that, right? How you give an assessment, find out what your students know, then you design your curriculum. You don't design your curriculum, then teach it, and then find out what your students know, and then reteach it. That's a waste of time. Find out early, then design your instruction based on your diagnostic. Who you teach, make sure you get to know your students. Curriculum, instruction, assessment need to be responsive to the needs of your students. So again, if you're just cracking open your teacher's edition and starting on Unit 1, Lesson 1, Page 1, and going through the book, remember those people that wrote the book don't know your kids. So you have to be the decision maker in the classroom, and you know your kids best. Use that curriculum as a tool. If they know all the information in Unit 1 as a class, then you're going to start with Unit 2. Or better yet, you're going to take the information off your assessment. Hopefully you have good assessments that tell you exactly which standards your kids need help in, and you're going to find those standards in your curriculum and start there. Things you have to know about your students, well, their language, how much academic language they have, how much content knowledge they have, their social, emotional, physical development, interests, special needs, and their learning styles. You can gather all this information usually from CUMES, background information, all kinds of areas. So the what you teach is the content, right? So you teach the California State Content Standards. You teach the next generation science standards, and we're going to touch a little bit upon the 21st century interdisciplinary themes and skills, which kind of run in the background of everything we do now. The content areas that you are responsible for teaching are all of these right here. But you will see there's 3 with asterisks: ELA, math, and PE. Those are the only 3 that are actually required by law in California. Yes, PE is required by law. 200 minutes every 2 weeks. And most districts were sued by some guy out of Oakland, I don't know, 8 years ago or something. And they did an audit statewide, and the guy won a ton of money because he found that a lot of districts weren't meeting their minimum minutes when it came to PE instruction. So make sure you're hitting those 200 minutes, and PE and recess doesn't count as PE. Science and history are not mandated. by the state of California yet. There are California state approved materials in both of those areas, but they are not mandated. The Common Core standards, I don't know, we're not going to spend too much on this. California Common Core standards, the California standards are actually about 85%, 88% the same as they were before Common Core. So we haven't changed too much. The expectation, the way we teach is a little different. You know, you might have heard of like old math and new math, and the way these Common Core math is, well, it's just showing kids different ways to solve problems. It's not changed itself. I'm sure many of you, if you've tuned into the news in the last 10 years, you've heard that there's communities up in arms about Common Core and how certain governing boards would refuse to teach the Common Core standards to kids because it was the government trying to brainwash our students. There's nothing in the actual Common Core standards themselves that are brainwashing kids. What triggered all of that outrage from the conservative side of the aisle was what was called Appendix B, that had suggested readings, suggested literature to accompany some of the standards. And some of the literature that was listed in Appendix B had titles and content that conservative individuals disagreed with. So they took that as grounds to say that the Common Core standards were trying to brainwash students, when in fact, Appendix B is not mandatory reading. It was a may use these materials. So because I had one of the schools I was principal at, had a parent come in and say, I refuse to let my child sit in the classroom where they were learning the Common Core. I said, okay, well, I respect your wishes. Here's a copy of the grade level standards in the Common Core for your daughter. Take them home this weekend, and I want you to just go ahead and highlight every one you don't want us to teach her. Okay, and bring it back, and we'll make sure that I find an alternative placement for her when those lessons are being taught. He said, that's fair. He came home, and guess how many highlights were in the standards? 0, because everything in there, he thought, gosh, no, I want my daughter to know that. And it was like, yeah, I know. And so, again, he was drinking the Kool-Aid, and so he missed the point entirely. With language arts, you have what's called anchor standards, and these are broad standards that cut across all grade level spans, which is kind of nice. So there's more consistency from K to 12. And then you have the grade level standards itself, which are organized by the 4 strands, which are reading, writing, listening, and speaking, and language. And within each strand, there's domains that are consistent across grade levels. Looks kind of like this. Reading, writing, speaking, and listening go across the top there. K5, it's foundational skills, literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects in grades 6 through 12. And you see that speaking and listening goes all the way across. But there's reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language across all grade levels. Math, you have the standards for mathematical practice, which really capture process and habits of mind across all grade levels. I'm going to share these with you. These are of critical importance. So here are the standards for math practice. I want you to go ahead and take a screenshot of that if you can. Get to know these. These are fantastic if you're going to teach any math. That means if you're going to be a K-6 teacher or a 7-12 math teacher. So you look at each of these 8 standards for math practice. Number 1, making sense of problems and persevering in solving them, right? That's a huge component. How do you teach kids to have math endurance? Reasoning abstractly and quantitatively. Constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. This is actually one we're focusing on at my school right now. How do you teach students to construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others? So we use what's called number talks to do that. Modeling, using appropriate tools, attending to precision, looking for and making use of structure, and looking for, hold on, I've got some, it's covering, looking for and expressing regularity and repeated reasoning. So these are 8 standards for math practice that go across, again, all kindergarten through 12th grade math instruction. 3 districts, my district and 2 others, including the high school district, are actually doing vertical articulation that we focus on these 8 practices and how we can bring continuity and consistency within the 3 districts to help our students through the entire system. So it's good stuff. Common Core Math, there's traditional pathway back when we used, Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. Math 1, Math 2, Math 3 is your integrated pathway. Now you're actually seeing integrated, math, integrated 2, integrated 1. Your integrated 2 is your advanced math track as a freshman. So you hopefully have 8th graders that are starting to qualify for that. 21st century interdisciplinary themes. You have global awareness, economic and entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial literacy, civic literacy, health literacy, environmental literacy. These are all things that are kind of in the background when you're creating lessons. Don't get too wrapped up in this. This is great if you can sprinkle in these ideas as you're teaching, but they're not testing this. I know it sounds bad that but that's the game we play. We have 180 days, and that's not a lot of time to teach kids all the standards. But if you can find creative ways to, incorporate or integrate global awareness and civic literacy, as well as environmental literacy into your instruction, it just makes it more powerful. Life and career skills, technology skills, the 4 C's of 21st century learning: creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration, right? So we want our kids always thinking creatively. We want them thinking critically. Want them collaborating, want them communicating. If you think about, the whole idea of we're trying to get our students ready for jobs that don't exist yet. How many of you heard that statement in the last 5 years? Well, the one thing we do, it's tough to plan for things that don't exist, but the one thing we know that will exist 10, 20, 30 years from now are people and problems. If you can't communicate and collaborate with people, then you're not going to be successful in most areas unless you're a computer software engineer and you're stuck in a cubicle writing code. You might be fine, but other than that, and you're going to have to think critically and problem solve. So those 2 skills, people and problems, we want to get our kids ready to deal with those 2 things. Informational literacy, media literacy, this is huge, right? A lot of our learning is happening online now, and so we have to teach our kids to decipher what's real and what isn't. They can't just believe everything that's on the internet or Wikipedia. I know every year I always trick my students. I send out a warning letter about the dangers of dihydroxide and how it kills millions of people every year, and that they need to watch and stay away from it. We should try to outlaw dihydroxide. And does anybody know what dihydroxide is? Yeah, it's water, absolutely. But kids start believing it. They freak out. Oh my gosh, we got to stay away from it. It's like, no, see, it's you can sound really smart online, but if you don't fact check, then you have issues. So got to teach your kids to be fact checkers. Life and career skills, they have to be flexible. They have to show initiative. Social and cross-cultural skills, they have to be productive and accountable. All right, so that's the background. Flew through that because I really want to spend some time talking about lesson sequencing and planning. So thinking about different instructional approaches, we're going to look at direct instruction, which is teacher-centered, and then student-centered instruction next week, which is more social and independent. So there's different types of planning. You have lesson planning, weekly planning, unit planning, course planning. We're going to focus tonight on lesson planning. So all the difference between these ones is if you start at the bottom there, you work your way backwards. Course planning is looking at an entire year. What does your course look like? All right. What do you hope students accomplish by the end of your course? Well, then you got to break that into units, which are periods where you're going to check for understanding, but then also weekly or lessons. And then individual daily lesson planning, right? So you work backwards from that course, that end product you want at the end of the course, and you put checkpoints, which is basically working backwards to road mapping how they're going to get there. The traditional lesson planning process is where you select a topic from the curriculum, design a bunch of activities around that topic, design and give an assessment, give a grade, and move on. That's what school was like when I was a kid. Now we're looking at selecting a standard and then actually breaking that into an objective, designing an assessment. So it's what do we want kids to know? How will we know they learned it? Designing an assessment. plan instructional activities, assess and use that data from the assessment to give feedback, then reteach or move to the next level. That's what we're doing now. So lesson sequence, you want to identify a standard. Then from that standard, which you're going to see the standards are quite complex. And within each one standard, you might have 8, 12 discrete skills. Well, if you can't really design a lesson on one standard. You can design a unit on a standard, or a weekly plan on the standard, but a daily lesson, which we're talking about here, has to be designed around an objective, a teachable objective, something that you can teach in a day or two at the most, and can be measured and assessed in a day to see whether or not kids got it. So that's what we're going to work on tonight. And then you want to activate prior knowledge. You want to model. You want to give perfect structured practice. Then you want to have guided practice, then independent practice, then you assess. We're going to review each of these stages. So deconstructing a common core standard into a teachable objective. So let's take a look at this standard. And I recommend, if you have a phone, there's a great app that has all the California state content standards. It's free. I highly recommend you download it, because you're going to be playing with the standards over the next week as you design your own lesson. So you want to see which grade level you want to pick a standard from. And we're going to look at this one right here from 3rd grade. Operations and algebraic thinking, A3. Use multiplication and division within 100 to solve word problems in situations involving equal groups, arrays, and measurement quantities. For example, using drawings, equations with a symbol for the unknown number to represent the problem. That's one 3rd grade standard. Let's look at how many actual discrete skills that there are in this standard that could be broken up into individual lessons. So first, here's the standard. Use multiplication within 100 to solve word problems. Boom. You have to teach 3rd graders how to do that. Actually, just using multiplication within 100 before you get to the word problems. Use multiplication within 100 to solve word problems in situations involving equal groups. Using multiplication within 100 to solve word problems in situations involving arrays. Using multiplication within 100 to solve word problems in situations by using drawings. Same standard. Use division. Again. So you had eight discrete skills, probably even more. But you had 8 objectives in one standard. So this one standard could take you 2 weeks to get through, probably a lot longer. This 2 weeks if you assume that the kids are going to ace it after one lesson. But we know 3rd graders have to have a lot of work in multiplication and division. But multiplication in itself is a discrete skill. Division in itself is a discrete skill. We know that there is a relationship. We know that as adults, but kids don't know that yet. You have to teach that to them. All right. So let's do it together. We're going to look at a 1st grade standard. Stick in math because it's just so much more discrete. 1st grade, operations and algebraic thinking, C6. Here we go. Add and subtract within 20. Demonstrating fluency for addition and subtraction within 10. Use strategies such as counting on, making 10, decomposing a number, using relationships between addition and subtraction, and creating equivalent but easier or known sums. All right, who thinks they can identify the first objective, the first discrete skill within this standard? Good. Add within 20. So, Jared, you have 2 standards there. Adding within 20 is one, and subtracting is a separate one, right, for 1st graders. Very discrete. But you're on the right track. Okay, so let's take a look, right? So add within 20, making 10 is one skill. So students will be able to add within 20 by making 10. That's what your lesson would be. So you would design an entire 1st grade math lesson based on students will be able to add within 20, and then you have a by statement. Everybody say to yourself, or even out loud, by statement. That if you have an objective without a by statement, that means you don't have an outcome. You have to have an outcome. How are they going to do it? How are they going to add within 20? In this case, they're going to do it by making 10, okay? Using 10 frames, using Unifix cubes, something like that, okay? Subtract within 20 by counting on. Students will be able to subtract within 20 by counting on, okay? Demonstrate fluency for addition within 10 by what? How are they going to do it? By, and we're talking about fluency within 10 by practicing their addition skills, by playing around the world, by using Unifix cubes, by, so you want that by statement all the time because students want to know how they're going to learn it. This makes learning relevant. Does that make sense? All right. So the difference between an objective and a measurable objective, if I have an objective here, which is students will be able to identify the attributes of the main character of a story. That's an objective. I'm going to make it measurable right here. Students will be able to identify the attributes of the main character of a story by using textual evidence to create a wordle. You see the difference between the two? You have a target, you have a goal of what students will be able to do, but how are they going to do it? You have to have that by statement, okay? That's how you write a good objective, and it's going to make your teaching much more focused when you start writing your lesson plans. No, I already did that. Okay. Any questions about deconstructing a Common Core standard into a teachable objective? Go for it. Paul. Or did you have a question? I see yes in the chat, but I don't see the chat until I stop. So no question, or you understand what I'm talking about? Okay. Do you feel like if I were to give you a random standard right now, you could write a teachable objective with a by statement? Don't dare me. I'll do it. Okay. I'm going to my standards app. And I'm going to go to math because it's easier. And I'm going to go to 5th grade. Here we go. 5th grade, operations and algebraic thinking 1. Here's the standard. Use parentheses, brackets, or braces in numerical expressions and evaluate expressions with these symbols. Give me one objective with a by statement. I'll even type it in the chat here. Hold on. So use parentheses, brackets, or braces in numerical expressions and evaluate expressions with these symbols. All right, give me one objective with one by statement. Susan, the app, let me see. It is called, just as California Standards, it's yellow with a black California in it. You're always going to start your objective with students will be able to. Perfect. Kevin, right on, you're on the right on, right? It's okay if it seems simple, because what seems simple to you and I is not simple to a student who's never learned something before. So students will be able to evaluate expressions by using parentheses. Perfect. Got your by statement. You're going to be focusing just on parentheses. Kids might not even have to write anything. You might just be modeling the whole time. You might be putting them up there. Okay. All right, let's move on. So the next stage, you've created your objective. Now you know what your target is. The next thing you're going to do is activate prior knowledge. Or APKs, it's called. The purpose of APK is to help students transfer something they've already learned, what is already known to them, to what is yet unlearned, right? So remember week 1 when we talked about making those connections? This is that really important part for the brain. You're turning on the brain. You're channeling those connections that have already been made so they can have an easier time connecting to what you're about to learn. Without activating prior knowledge, it's like you're trying to build roads that don't exist, right? When it might be easier to take a road that might already be there, you just want to make it stronger. And so that's what you're doing through activating prior knowledge. All right, so the teacher during this time is going to prompt students to think about and access prior knowledge. You're going to monitor partner discussions. You might say, all right, students, today's objective is students will be able to blah, 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 blah. What do you know about blah, 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 blah already? Or what have we already learned about blah, 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 blah? And then you go ahead and tell your partner. You're going to monitor, you're going to clarify, you're going to confirm, connect prior knowledge to the measurable objective. Students are going to be thinking about, discussing with partners, listening and responding to your clarifications, and connecting to the measurable objective. Ensure that student engagement through continuous checking for understanding is happening at every stage starting now, okay? Every stage, check for understanding. The next stage of your lesson, input model. Everybody say input model. Purpose of input model is to give students all the information they need to successfully complete the task and to provide a model of how to do so in a perfect example. If the initial instruction of every measurable objective always begins with input model, student levels of concern will decrease and motivation will increase. This is how you'll get them to buy in. You're showing them how to do it. Students know that the teacher will always give them all the information they'll need and will show them how to use it before practice of that is expected. And this, in turn, leads to a dramatic and positive impact. So if you just hand a student a worksheet and you don't teach them how to do it, they're lost. But if you model what students are going to do, not just teaching at them, right? You almost have to do, it's called metacognition. So you think aloud. You almost act like you're the only person in the room and you're working through the problem as a student. This is where you might make a mistake that you know students aren't going to make and show them how to correct it. This is where you're going to teach them the steps, and you're going to do this explicitly. You might even write down the steps for them so they can refer back to them during the initial stages of practice. This is probably the most powerful part of the lesson. And oftentimes it's skipped or it's rushed through. Let me show you one. Now you try it. There is a way to model and check for understanding. You can see blank stares on kids' faces. You might have to do a couple of models, the more complex something is. So really know your students, and especially if it's a complex idea, okay? So what does it look like? The teacher, this is the I do it stage. Everybody say I do it, okay? You're going to provide explicit input and knowledge, the rule or the process. Students are going to respond. They should not be writing. They should have nothing on their desk during this stage. Call response is good. Don't call on individuals. In my school, it's against the law to raise your hand and volunteer and answer. Because when you call on volunteers, you're sending the message that learning is voluntary. Learning should not be voluntary in your classroom. Learning should be expected from all. And so you have to figure out a way to get every student to answer every question every time you ask one. This is done through call response, pair share, picking non-volunteers, okay, or whiteboards, or something that gets a response from every kid. Otherwise, it is far too easy for a student to just glide through your class without ever having to open their mouth, especially second language learners. They're really good at blending in and looking like they're engaged. So they're just watching and listening to the input you're providing. During modeling, you're doing it, giving visual and verbal demonstrations, explaining your thinking, which is metacognition, checking for understanding of the model content, and connecting knowledge to the measurable objective. Students are watching and listening to the thinking, demonstrating their understanding by echoing or choral response, and connecting knowledge. Again, so you don't see that they're writing, they're not talking. The only time you're going to get something out of them is through choral response. Does this make sense? Stop me if it doesn't. Activating prior knowledge qualifies an yeah, that's another way of an anticipatory set. The thing is anticipatory set, Cody. I'm sorry, the chat's not on my screen unless I stop. So raise your hand on the participants list if you have a question, and then I'll make sure I stop in the middle. But an anticipatory set, a lot of time, is to get them excited, is to give them a hook. Hey, boys and girls, this is what we're going to learn today. This is why it's relevant. But the activating prior knowledge is actually a process that the students engage in, right? You're going to find out, or you're going to have them share what they know about what you're about to teach. Okay. Sometimes you ever heard of KWL? So it's what do you know? What do you want to know? What have you learned? So you do what do you know already? What do you want to know about it? And then you teach. And then at the end, you do what do you learned? Okay. Does that make sense? Are we good? Ready to move on? All right, so the chat's gone, so I don't see the chat right now. Structured practice. This is perfect practice. So this stage, the first stage was called I do it. This next stage is called we do it together, or we do it, you show me, okay? So this is the perfect practice stage. Everybody say perfect practice. You cannot let a student make a mistake here, and the way that you do not let them make a mistake here. So you've just modeled it, okay? You're up at the front, or you're at the Elmo, whatever you're doing, and you're the one with the marker, the dry erase marker. You just finished doing that whole model stage. Structured practice, you're still the one with the marker. But now you might have students, you say, all right, let's do this next problem. Go ahead and turn to your partner. What is step one? Tell your partner what step one is. Then you draw a non-volunteer. Stephen, what is step one? Tell me what step one is. All right, Mr. Borba, step one is you have to do this, and then you write it. Okay, good. Does everybody agree? Thumbs up. Great. All right, turn and tell your partner. What is step two? Ready, go. Tell your partner. They're telling their partner. See, every kid is answering. Every kid's talking. Non-volunteer. Stephanie, what is step two? Mr. Borba, step two is blah, blah, blah. Great, I'm going to do it. Like that. How many of you agree or disagree? Show me thumbs up, thumbs down. I disagree. Okay, you disagree. Why do you disagree? And you have that conversation. Okay, so this is where up on the board, nothing is going to be incorrect. The teacher walks students through the practice in a lockstep fashion. The kids are actually, you're forcing the kids to walk you through it in lockstep. Okay. All right. We do it together. Leads the pacing. You're controlling the pace, so nobody goes ahead. As soon as you give students a piece of paper with problems on it, boom, they're gone. You're done teaching. Okay. Even if you're like, hey, let's all do number one together. Okay. You're gonna lose them. Okay. I'm gonna show you how to avoid that losing control in teacher-centered instruction in this direct instruction model without doing that, without letting it go there. Okay, so lockstep, lead students through the parts of the rule, the process, the order, examples, what's the rule, what's the next step, demonstrate self-correction, review the whole thing, check for understanding of content, connecting to the objective. Students are following the pace, they're not working ahead, they're following the teacher, they're participating in example, they're demonstrating understanding, and they're connecting to that objective. Remember why we're here today, boys and girls, we're learning to do X. Okay, that's the objective. Checking for understanding. Now, we get into guided practice. So you think like if I'm flying a kite, I'm letting it go a little bit at a time. I'm gradually releasing the kite. You're doing the same thing in a really good lesson. You had the kite in your hands during an input model. Now you let a little bit go, and the students, just a little bit, but you're still controlling that kite. It's really close to you during structured practice because you're not going to let it fall. You've checked for understanding. they're ready to move to guided practice. This is a great opportunity to have whiteboards. All right, next example, I'm going to write it on the board. I want you to work with partners. Do step 1 of this problem. Ready? Go. They do, now it's not they're telling you step 1. They're doing step 1. They're working with a partner. Okay, 3, 2, 1, hold up your whiteboard. I want to check who's got it. Boom. See, so it's, oh, you're just barely letting it go. You've given just a tad more control to the student. You've relinquished or released some of your control because now they're the ones writing it. So the opportunity to make mistakes has gone up just a little bit, but you're not letting them get too far ahead, okay? Now maybe you do a second example in guided practice, but now you say, all right, go ahead and you're based on what I saw during this first one, you're ready to do steps 1 and 2 before I check for understanding. Ready? Go. If you notice that all your kids got it, great, do another one. Go ahead and do all 3 steps for this third example. And then you're checking for understanding. If 85, 90% of your kids get it, you move on. If you're noticing at this stage that there's a lot of mistakes, back it up. Back it up. All right, let's do another one. Just do step 1. Or you know what? Let's do another one together and you tell me again. You can back up between the stages. Does that make sense? Good. Is this all making sense? How are you feeling about this whole process? Very scripted, very intentional, very methodical. Have you ever witnessed a lesson taught like this? Okay, good. This is the way teaching has to be when you're talking about early stages in learning, when you're talking about students that don't have a lot of prior knowledge. So if you're going to be teaching elementary and you're going to be introducing new topics, even if you're teaching high school advanced math and you're introducing a new concept, this is how you have to introduce learning to students. Okay. Then you can move into that student-centered learning, which we're going to talk about next week. And it's the application part, right? It's okay, apply what you've learned or what you know to a real life situation. That's fun, it's engaging, it's exciting. Let's build something, let's do something, let's use our hands, let's collaborate, project-based learning. Everybody loves that, but you can't do project-based learning unless students have content knowledge, and we have to teach content knowledge. And this is the most effective way to do it. So guided practice, the purpose of it, build accuracy with less support. Did you see the difference between guided practice and structured practice? You see that? So this is that first stage input model. I do it. Second stage structured practice is perfect practice. We do it, you show me, or we do it together. Guided practice is we do it, I show you, or I monitor and support. Give matching examples for students to work on. Monitor your students. Praise prompt leave. Pre-correctives. Reinforce accuracy over speed. It's not about who gets done fast. That's why just do step 1. It's not about getting it right. I mean, it's not about being finished first. It's about getting it right, doing it correctly. Okay, check for understanding all the time. Okay. Again, check for understanding, move forward, move backwards based on your students. This is where curriculum can get you in trouble. Curriculum might have, all right, teacher, please do this one example. Next stage, give your students this example. Next stage, hand out this paper. So it'll give you the scripted lessons because a book would weigh 1,000 pounds if they had this written into every lesson in a curriculum, right? So you have to your students are going to dictate the pace of your lesson, all right? Your teacher's edition is going to give you a good starting place, okay? It'll give you problems to use, okay? But really when it comes down to it, you have to know your kids and where they are and what they need. And you're going to informally assess them the entire time you're teaching. Independent practice, right? This is the stage to build speed and confidence. So if you are letting your students go into independent practice, they've shown you through input model, through structured practice and guided practice that they're ready. You didn't see any mistakes. They're ready to go. But notice about the term practice is still there. This does not mean hand your students a worksheet and go back to your desk and correct papers. This is still students practicing and you supporting. You have to monitor them, okay? I've never seen a coach say, here, run these plays. I'm going to go have a glass of water on the sideline. They watch their team practice the play, right? And then they correct them. And also, you've noticed during this whole lesson, the 2 or 3 students that have struggled a little bit. So this is where you might pull those 2 or 3 students back to your table and give them a little more intensive support, okay? Or you might have noticed 2 or 3 kids that were like, this is so easy, and you notice that they were just flying through this. You pull them back to your table during independent practice and you push them a little harder. You challenge them with something more deep or complex. So I monitor, you're giving delayed feedback, observing speed and accuracy, plan your next steps. Yeah, they're demonstrating mastery. Standard, measurable objective with by statement, lesson importance or relevance, what resource and materials you need, activate prior knowledge, input model, structured practice, guided practice, closure, independent practice, assess. Those are the stages. A lot of you have heard the term Madeline Hunter. She was an amazing teacher, I don't know, half a century ago that developed the 5-step lesson plan. This is Madeline Hunter's 5-step lesson plan on steroids. Same idea, but just so much deeper, so much richer, so much more intentional. All right. Always use the standards. Always use current data on your students. Always think about your pacing. Do you need to go faster? Can you, and just because in your lesson plan you said you're going to do 5 examples during guided practice, but you notice that your kids get it, does that mean you have to do 5 examples? No, do 1. If you notice your kids are getting it, turn the page, stop, right? This is, I mean, you have to make those decisions. If you can buy time because your kids get something, buy that time because you're going to need it later when they don't get it. Think about relevance. Why do they have to know this? I remember an English teacher and we were reading Moby Dick and he's like, you know what? The only reason you're going to have to know this is so you answer a few questions on Jeopardy, right? Someday. That's all I needed to know because it was like, you know what? That's worth it to me. I like watching Jeopardy. So I'm actually going to pay attention. But you have to give that relevance, okay? You're going to have to know this because X. You might have to plan a party. You might, whatever it might be. Okay. Terry, you're going to be that teacher, okay? And then you're going to plan your questions. This is a big part of lesson planning. If you don't think about the questions you want to ask during a lesson, this really applies to language arts. So if you've got a novel, for example, and your plan is just to read chapter 3 in Charlotte's Web. And as you're reading, you just start thinking of questions and you ask. Typically, those questions are going to be low-level questions because those are what pop into my mind. You have to prepare. You have to think ahead of, man, I really want to stretch my students' thinking. I want to ask a question that's going to cause them to make a connection to a story we read a month ago because I want them to make a connection. I want them to compare and contrast. That's a higher level thinking. So I'm going to write down a question. I'm going to put it on a Post-it, and I'm going to put a little mark right where I want to ask it. You have to plan like that. You can't wing it as a teacher. I mean, you can, and you'll be okay. But if you want to be a highly effective teacher, you have to plan everything you're going to do. And if you're going to teach language arts or history, those 2 areas, you need to plan what questions you're going to ask them and when. Because if you don't do that, if you're just going to rely upon your gut feeling to ask questions, I guarantee you 90% of your questions are going to be level 1 DOK questions, which are recall questions, low-level questions. So you want to make sure you're planning ahead. What is Webb's depth of knowledge? We're going to take a look at that real quick. All right, now, actually, I'm going to pull it up on my file. Hold on. Webb's DOK. So how many of you have seen this wheel before? Anybody? Bueller? Anybody? No? Okay. This is called Webb's depth of knowledge. It's kind of like Bloom's taxonomy, if you're familiar with that. And so if we look at this, you have level 1 right here, which is the recall. Level 2 is skills and concepts. Level 3, strategic thinking. Level 4 is extended thinking. Then you have all these verbs within this wheel. So in level 1, you're asking students to arrange, repeat, recall, recite, tell, state, tabulate, use, name, illustrate, label, list, memorize, quote, report, measure, match, all those things. Those are low-level thinking activities. Level 2, on the other hand, you're asking them to infer, graph, classify, separate, cause and effect, compare, contrast, organize, construct, predict, interpret. That's higher level. That's better. Look at level 3. Assess, revise, apprise, critique, formulate, hypothesize, draw conclusions, differentiate, compare, use concepts to solve non-routine problems, cite evidence. And then the highest level, you're actually having analyze, create, prove, synthesize, apply. Those are activities. Down here, you're going to see what some of those activities might look like. I will make this this handout available to you in the week 3 folder. I'll put it in there tomorrow morning, but that's a great resource. It's not gonna be the last time that it kind of is, Terry. That's what when actually it's funny is the SBAC assessment uses Webb's depth of knowledge with the questions. So there's DOK 4 questions that are much harder than a DOK 1 question, right? Because students are having to think about how to apply knowledge that they have. All right, tonight's attendance question. Looking at those math practices, standards for mathematical practice, which of the standards resonates with you the most, and which do you consider to be the most critical for student success? You don't have to write multiple paragraphs here, guys. I'm not trying to give you an extra homework assignment. 2 or 3 sentences is fine. If you want to show off, it's totally cool. I do read them. But just 2 or 3 sentences. Okay, you have plenty of work to do in this class. I don't want to overwhelm you. All right, so that is your attendance question. Got it? Standard for math practice. Which one? Okay. And back to our lesson tonight. So this is the lesson plan template, and I'm actually going to stay in there, that I just went over with you. And I'm going to make this available to you, not these triangles. This is an activity I was doing. Okay, this is the direct instruction lesson plan template, and I'm going to make this available to you because I actually, for your assignment on creating a lesson plan, I want you to use this, not the one Brandman gives you. This one will get you much further and it'll make you a much better teacher. Okay, so what I've done with this lesson plan is not only given each section, but I've given you a description of each section. Okay, and I want this to be a resource to you and for you to put it in your teaching binder and really refer to it. I've really put a lot of work into this over the years, something I use with all of my new teachers. So I definitely want you to use this for as long as you can, okay? But definitely, if you have questions about it, don't hesitate to ask me. All right, any questions about the direct instruction lesson plan? Okay. See why this is such an important class to be part of tonight? All right. So closure tonight. Hopefully you're able to create a objective, a teachable objective with a by statement by deconstructing a California standard. You should be able to identify the components of a direct instruction lesson plan. And we started talking about Webb's depth of knowledge. So those were our objectives tonight. Let's do a Kahoot to show me how much. You will be creating your own lesson plan as one of our assignments. I think it's due, is it due Sunday or is it due the following week? And that's one of your assignments that I really will give you a lot of feedback on because I feel like it's a critical assignment. So I'm not going to grade you super hard on it. So like if you don't do well on it, that won't be it. So don't worry about the grading on it. Just do your best. But I really want to give you feedback to be helpful on that one. so that you know how to create a good lesson through using tonight's lecture and using that format with all the descriptions. And then just do your best, take that California State Common Core Standard, teachable objective, and then that gradual release. I'm going to look at what you're doing during those stages and what the kids are doing. Okay. You're going to use the form, Paul. You're just going to fill out that form. You're not going to write an essay. Okay, you're welcome. All right, you ready, Kahoot? Get your devices. Here we go. There's 12 of you. 415-910. I'll make sure I put those I'll put everything in the folder tonight before I go. Seven of you? Come on, where's everybody at tonight? All right, we're going to get started in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we go. When preparing a lesson, you should always consider absolutely levels of questions you ask, the importance of the lesson, and pacing. Good. Next question. How many levels are there in Webb's depth of knowledge? Four levels in Webb's depth of knowledge. 4 levels. Before creating a lesson, the teacher needs to pull what out of a standard? Yes, nice job. Teachable objective, measurable objective, one or the other. You activate prior knowledge at beginning of a lesson. Good job. Which stage is known as perfect practice? Structured practice is perfect practice. Structured practice is to we do it together, as guided practice is to How often should you check for understanding during a lesson? Constantly, always assessing. At the end of the lesson, you still need to what? That's right. Provide closure, independent practice, and assess. You guys are getting it. You paid attention tonight. After the lesson, it's important to what? Actually, I think it's have a glass of wine and then reflect, adjust, and reteach. Winner, Paul, congratulations, 9,576 points. That concludes tonight's meeting. Does anybody have any questions? The attendance question, you betcha. The attendance question was, where is it? Do I have it still or I have to pull it up real quick? Which standard for mathematical practice, which was a slide that I showed early on in the presentation, do you feel is the most important? Why? You're not in the chat, Kevin. You email it to me by Sunday night at midnight. Here it is right here. Week 3 PowerPoint slide that shows the standards for student mathematical practice. These standards are the same for all grade levels. Which of the standards resonates with you the most? Which do you consider to be the most critical for success and why? 2 or 3 sentences. All right, I'm going to end the recording. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend. And I'll be posting everything